Okay, coffee secured.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to Sip&Talk.
Welcome, Sip&Talkers.
You know, the news has been so wild lately. I feel like I need to put down the coffee and just get out the popcorn.
Huh. Popcorn might be an understatement. I feel like you need a spreadsheet just to keep track of everything going on.
Right. And we're diving into a few things today that, on the surface, seem completely disconnected.
Totally disconnected. I mean, first you've got this huge, sudden shift in U.S. immigration policy.
Then there's this absolutely devastating fire in Hong Kong.
And then, kind of out of left field, you have major Japanese cultural events, like concerts, just suddenly canceled in China.
Exactly. Like the Ayumi Hamasaki concert. I mean, thousands of fans just left hanging.
But there's a thread, isn't there? A kind of a dark logic that ties all of this together.
There is. And that's the model we're going to unpack today. We're calling it, when A angers you, B gets punished.
Right. It's this idea of displaced aggression, but not just on a personal level.
No, not at all. This is a political and social tool. It's a mechanism, really.
Yeah.
The idea is that a power structure, let's call it A, faces some kind of pressure or a crisis or maybe its own failure.
And instead of dealing with that, they redirect all the public anger that comes from it.
They're redirected toward a safer target, be something or someone they can't really fight back.
And that target B, it's so often vulnerable groups or an external enemy and this is the really ironic part.
The people themselves.
Exactly. So that's our mission for this Sip and Talk. We're going to look at how this emotional engineering works from the U.S. all the way to East Asia and really ask, who pays the price for it all?
Okay, let's start in the United States. It's such a clear example of how political friction can, almost instantly turn into these huge policy swings.
It's textbook, really. So the trigger here, RA, was that National Guard shooting incident near the White House.
Right, a very localized, specific public safety crisis.
But the administration used it almost immediately as political cover to just slam the brakes on immigration.
And that speed is so important to this model. Instead of just focusing on the security incident itself, the reaction was to, tighten the borders across the board.
Even when the new policies have no direct logical link to what actually happened, President Trump just hit the accelerator on these, quote, reverse migration policies.
And these aren't small tweaks. The proposals we're seeing they are incredibly stringent.
So we're talking about a permanent halt to immigration from what he called third world countries.
And that term itself is so vague. The list of countries isn't even defined yet, but the message is clear. It's a massive shift away from, say, economic-based immigration.
But it's not just about stopping new people from coming in, is it? It's also aimed at people who are already in the U.S.
Oh, absolutely. It's very punitive. One part is the expulsion of any foreigner who isn't deemed a net asset to the U.S. economy.
A net asset? What does that even mean in practice?
It means their right to be here becomes conditional. It's like they're subject to this constant cost-benefit analysis by the government.
And on top of that, an immediate stop to all welfare benefits for foreigners, that would put millions of people's livelihoods at risk just overnight.
It would. But maybe the most explosive part of this whole thing is the proposal about naturalized citizens.
This is the one that really got my attention.
Yeah. We're talking about potentially stripping permanent residency or even citizenship from naturalized citizens if they're found to be, quote, non-compliant with government policy.
That just undermines the entire foundation of what American citizenship is supposed to be. It's supposed to be permanent.
It turns it into a conditional privilege.
Yeah.
And that would, it would just shatter the sense of security for every single immigrant in the country, no matter how long they've been there or what their record is.
So let's talk about the cost, because this is the core of the redirection. You solve the political problem, A, by putting all the blame and the burden on the immigrant group, B.
Exactly. But here's the thing. That group, B, isn't just a political punching bag. They are a critical part of the American economy.
Right. So if these policies were actually put into place, the economic blowback would be, what, immediate?
Immediate and severe. You'd see these crippling labor shortages. Think about it. Agriculture, construction, the hospitality industry.
All heavily reliant on immigrant labor.
Completely. If those workers are suddenly gone, the ability of those entire sectors to even operate would just crater.
And the result for everyone else is what? Prices go up?
Prices go up across the board. Food, services, housing. So, the rage gets redirected. A political base might be happy for a moment, but in the end, every American consumer gets punished. It's a self-inflicted wound.
And that's just the domestic cost. What about geopolitically?
Well, experts see this as a huge erosion of America's soft power. Its appeal as a global leader.
It makes the country look unreliable.
It really does. It creates deep mistrust with allies, especially countries that have large diasporas in the U.S. You're basically signaling that citizenship is fragile, that it depends on political whims. America becomes a less attractive, less stable superpower.
So the model holds up perfectly. A political crisis, A, happens. And instead of looking inward, the government creates a political firebreak, transferring the blame to a marginalized group, B.
Yep. Even if it hurts the country's own economy and international standing in the long run, the power center protects itself from accountability. That's the key.
Oh, okay, so let's shift gears now and go across the world to Hong Kong and that just catastrophic fire at Wang Fuk Court.
This was so much more than a fire.
Yeah.
You called it a societal stress test, and that's exactly what it was.
The scale of it was just, it's hard to imagine. A fire spreading across 7 connected 31-story residential towers.
Devastating. The casualty numbers were staggering. At least 55 dead, almost 300 either missing or in the hospital. For a modern, high-density city, that's almost unthinkable.
And what came out pretty quickly was the real trigger, RA. And it wasn't the initial spark of the fire.
No, it was a catastrophic failure of governance, of regulation.
Yeah.
Fire officials confirmed it, the spread was abnormally fast, and they linked it directly to the use of non-compliant, highly flammable materials during a renovation project.
Oh, and we're not talking about, old wiring from the 70s.
Not at all. This is where it becomes a systemic problem. The materials they found included this non-fire-resistant green netting, plastic tarps, and the real culprit, highly flammable styrofoam boards.
Styrofoam, on the outside of a high-rise.
Yes, all over multiple floors. It was basically acting as fuel, turning the exterior of these buildings into a vertical chimney.
Which brings us to the accountability gap. This is the part that is just infuriating.
It is. Sources confirmed that the Labor Department had actually been to the site. They inspected it multiple times just a week before the fire.
And they saw the materials.
They identified the unqualified materials. They knew about the violations, but they failed to effectively stop the project or force them to fix it.
So they knew the bomb was ticking.
They knew, and they didn't disarm it. That failure of regulation, that is the true A in our model, the real source of the anger.
And the public outrage was, of course, enormous. And the timing of this, couldn't have been worse for the government?
No. The tragedy happened right before the 2025 Legislative Council elections. So the government's response suddenly became this high-stakes test of Beijing's governance model in Hong Kong.
So under all that pressure, what do? They pull a classic deflection. They find a scapegoat, B, that's immediate and less threatening.
And that scapegoat was bamboo scaffolding.
Bamboo scaffolding?
Yes. Chief Executive John Lee ordered checks on all construction projects, and then he specifically announced a plan to phase out the use of bamboo scaffolding.
Okay, so just looking at the evidence, why? Why bamboo scaffolding?
Because it's a perfect symbolic target. It's traditional, it's highly visible, and it looks old-fashioned. It's an easy thing to point a finger at.
But the public didn't buy it.
Not for a second. The criticism was immediate. People pointed out that the bamboo frames didn't actually burn all the way through. The core problem, the real fuel for the fire, was the modern plastic and styrofoam.
You can't blame an ancient building material for the failures of modern oversight.
Exactly. It's a type of responsibility cutting. When you can't admit that the system itself failed, because that implies deep-seated problems like corruption or just pure incompetence, you shift the blame to a secondary target, in this case the bamboo.
And it successfully prevents the public from focusing their anger on the real structural issues.
And you started to hear commentators connect this to what's known in the mainland as tofu dreg construction.
Right, the idea of shoddy, unsafe buildings where corners are cut to save money.
Exactly. It fueled this perception that Hong Kong was experiencing a mainlandization of its governance problems, that these kinds of systemic failures were becoming the norm.
And the political tension just keeps simmering. The chief executive floated the idea of delaying the election, to focus on disaster relief.
But the public perception was split right down the middle. Is this genuinely about helping people? Or is it a calculated move to avoid having a vote right when the government's incompetence is on full display?
So a completely preventable tragedy ends up exposing these deep cracks in governance. And the official response?
The official response is to blame the bamboo, to shift the public's gaze away from the regulators and the construction companies who were actually responsible.
Okay, let's move on to the friction between China and Japan. This example it's almost the most perfect illustration of the model because the state's anger, A, gets redirected.
Not at the foreign adversary.
No, it gets redirected entirely onto its own people. B becomes the domestic population.
The geopolitical spark, A, was really sharp and sudden. Relations just took a nosedive after Japan's prime minister, Sanae Takaichi, made comments suggesting Japan might get involved militarily if China moved on Taiwan.
And Beijing saw that as a huge provocation.
A huge one. But their official response wasn't military. It wasn't even major economic sanctions on Japanese companies.
It was, what would you call it, emotional warfare.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
They issued a "Don't travel to Japan" warning. And the reasons they gave were so vague. Something about worsening Japanese security, just completely unsubstantiated.
And the impact was immediate.
Oh, yeah. An estimated 500,000 trips were canceled. That's a loss of around 358 billion RMB for Japan's tourism industry. But as we always ask, who is really paying the price here?
It's the Chinese citizens, the families who had saved up, the students who had planned trips. They'd paid for flights, booked hotels, and suddenly their plans are just gone.
And you saw the complaints online, people saying, why do we, the ordinary people, have to pay the price for our government's political fights? The state's anger at Japan was directly translated into financial loss and disappointment for its own citizens.
And it went way beyond just travel. A sort of cultural iron curtain just fell almost overnight.
It did. At least a dozen Japanese music events across major cities, Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, they were all abruptly canceled. And the reason given was always this vague, inappropriate political atmosphere.
And this is where it gets, truly humiliating for the fans. Let's talk about the Ayumi Hamasaki concert in Shanghai.
Okay, so get this. The stage is fully built. A crew of 200 people has been working all night to get it ready. The concert is that day.
And the cancellation notice comes out on the morning of the show.
The morning of the show. 14,000 Chinese fans, many of whom had traveled from other provinces, paid for hotels, taken time off work.
What do they get?
They get a ticket refund. That's it. No compensation for their travel, their hotels, nothing. Just this cold, crushing disappointment served up for political reasons.
And then there was that other incident, the one at the One Piece anime event, that was somehow even more direct.
Oh, that was so vivid. The singer, Maki Atsuki, is on stage. She's in the middle of singing this beloved theme song from the show.
And they just cut her off.
Mid-song, the lights go out, the sound is cut, and she's literally escorted off the stage by the organizers.
Can you imagine the frustration of being in that crowd? It's not just a political statement at that point. It's a public act of shaming the fans themselves.
It is. And we have to understand the mechanism here. This isn't always a direct order from the very top. A lot of it is driven by what you could call administrative risk aversion.
Meaning the local officials and the concert promoters are just scared.
They're terrified. They're afraid of being seen as not patriotic enough. So to avoid any potential political trouble down the line, they just preemptively cancel everything. It's safer for their careers to disappoint thousands of fans than to risk one official's disapproval.
So the real victims, B, are the Chinese businesses, the promoters, the stagehands, and especially the fans.
And this pattern, this constant politically motivated cancellation, it just destroys any sense of commercial reliability. It makes foreign artists and investors extremely wary of the Chinese market.
It's a classic self-inflicted wound. The pressure from a diplomatic spat, A, is channeled into cultural restrictions, and the final cost is paid by the domestic economy and the domestic consumers, B.
Okay, so we've seen this model play out in three very different contexts. But that brings us to the really deep question, especially when we're talking about systems that are very good at managing dissent.
Right. Why is this whole redirection mechanism so stable? Why doesn't all this public anger, this frustration from systemic failures, why doesn't it ever seem to bubble up and target the central power structure?
That's the anger black hole. In a democratic society, protest is a low-cost rate. In a system like China's, it is an extremely high-cost risk.
So the lack of protest isn't because people are happy. It's because they've made a rational calculation.
Exactly. It's not about obedience. It's about a very carefully engineered ecology of compliance. And that's built on three pillars: fear, atomization, and emotional engineering.
Let's start with fear, the cost of resistance.
The lessons from history are very clear. Tiananmen, the more recent white paper protests, There's this collective memory that public dissent leads to severe consequences.
I saw a comment online once that really stuck with me. Someone said something like, having your real thoughts on record can cut off 3 generations of your family from public service jobs.
And that's the calculation. Is protesting a canceled concert ticket, or even your unemployment, worth that kind of multi-generational risk? For most people, the answer is no. The cost is just too high.
So that's fear. What about the second pillar, social atomization?
Atomization just means the society is deliberately fractured. It's broken up into isolated individuals who can't easily trust each other or organize effectively.
And technology plays a huge role in that.
A massive role. The Great Firewall, the constant surveillance. It all ensures that individual complaints stay individual. They never reach that critical mass you need for a collective movement. And on top of that, any independent organization, NGOs, unions, student groups, is either banned or heavily monitored.
So it's basically impossible to organize.
It's virtually impossible. And the result is a society that can be described as individually angry, but collectively silent. The frustration is there, but it's just background noise. It never gets organized enough to become a real threat.
And that silence then creates the perfect environment for the third pillar, emotional engineering.
And this is so sophisticated. The system doesn't just suppress anger. It actively manages it. It treats it like a resource to be channeled and diverted.
Okay, so let's break down the techniques here because this is fascinating. The first one is transfer, scapegoating.
Right. Transfer is when you take a real internal problem and you blame it on a safe external enemy. So, for example, the economy is slowing down, youth unemployment is sky high, that's A.
And the official narrative blames
Western containment efforts, or Japanese historical revisionism, or whatever the external enemy of the day is, that's B.
And that's so effective because it lets people feel like their suffering is valid, but it doesn't force them to question their own leadership.
Exactly. It's not our government's fault. We're suffering because we're under attack.
Yeah.
It completely outsources the blame.
Okay, the second technique is internalization. And this one feels particularly insidious.
It is. This is when you convert systemic failures into personal guilt. So, again, high unemployment is the problem, A. But the state narrative frames it as a personal failing, B.
So it becomes, you aren't hardworking enough, or you picked the wrong college major.
Precisely. And you see the result of this in phenomena like lying flat or tangping.
That's the movement of young people just opting out.
It's a passive protest.
Yeah.
It's what happens when young people realize that no matter how hard they work, they can't break through, so they just withdraw. That's an act of anger that's been turned inward. It's self-blame.
And if everyone is busy blaming themselves, they're not organizing to blame the system.
Exactly. The anger causes internal damage instead of creating external momentum.
And the final technique, responsibility cutting.
This is the political firewall. The core idea here is that the central government, A, is always good, wise, and well-intentioned.
So any problems that people see on the ground, corruption, that shoddy construction we talked about, that has to be the fault of someone else.
It's always blamed on corrupt local officials or greedy cadres or just a simple misunderstanding of the wise policies from the center.
So it lets people vent their anger at a replaceable target, like a local mayor, without ever letting that anger travel up the chain to the system itself.
The structure remains pristine and untouchable. All failures are just implementation errors, so you put it all together. The fear, the atomization, the emotional engineering, and you have your answer. That's the silence. That's the anger black hole.
And to show that this logic, this A forces B to sacrifice logic, isn't just for domestic issues, let's look at the biggest stage of all.
The geopolitical endgame for the war in Ukraine. This is the same calculus, just applied to entire nations.
So the idea here is that a superpower, like the US, becomes the source of pressure, A. They want a specific outcome, ending the war, cutting their financial commitment.
And to get that outcome, they propose a solution that forces the weaker party, in this case Ukraine, B, to make enormous sacrifices.
So let's look at the reported Trump peace plan draft. The sources we have describe it as forcing Ukraine into these impossible choices, basically land for peace.
The territorial demands are incredibly severe. Ukraine would have to constitutionally cede Crimea, Donetsk, and Lugansk to Russia, for good, and then freeze the current front lines.
Which would effectively make Russia's battlefield gains permanent legal territory.
And that's not all. Militarily, Ukraine would be banned from ever joining NATO, and NATO would have to promise never to accept them. Ukraine's military would be capped at 600,000 troops.
And what does Russia get for this?
Sanctions get lifted, and they potentially get readmitted to the G8. I mean, to most observers, this looked like a plan that was heavily tilted in Russia's favor.
So you have to ask, what's the strategic value of proposing a, quote, bad deal like that?
Well, the intent of the U.S. pressure, A, seems to have been to shock the European allies into action. By putting this extreme pro-Russian draft on the table, it forced Europe to confront the reality of the situation.
It forced them to come up with a real counter-strategy.
Which is exactly what happened. The UK, France, and Germany drafted a European counterproposal. This is B, or in this case, a different party, trying to correct the sacrifice.
And how was their version different?
The biggest difference was on territory. The European version calls for a ceasefire, but it explicitly refuses to legally recognize any borders changed by force.
So negotiations would start, but Ukraine would still legally own all its land.
Exactly. And their draft also removes the permanent NATO ban and suggests a much higher troop limit for Ukraine, closer to 800,000, recognizing their need to defend themselves.
But at the end of the day, given that Russia has the military advantage on the ground...
Well, experts say Putin had very little reason to accept the more balanced European version. Why would he?
So the central theme holds. You achieve a major diplomatic goal. A, by putting another party. B, under maximum pressure, forcing them to consider making the ultimate sacrifice. Trump's proposal, whatever you think of it, successfully forced Europe to get serious and start talking about the hard stuff, like who's going to pay for reconstruction.
So what stands out to you at the end of all this? We've gone through 3 completely different situations.
U.S. immigration, a fire in Hong Kong, cultural clashes in East Asia.
And in every single one, the pattern was exactly the same.
Absolutely. The when A angers you, B gets punished model. It's not a bug in the system. And this is the chilling part, it's a feature. It's a tool for maintaining stability by managing human emotion.
Whether you're channeling economic anxiety onto immigrants or deflecting blame for a tragedy onto bamboo or making music fans pay the price for a diplomatic fight.
The mechanism is identical. The power center stays safe and untouched while the vulnerable or the public pays the price.
And we always try to be objective here. We're not endorsing any one government's view. Our goal is just to give you, our listener, the framework to see these hidden mechanics for yourself, to encourage your own independent thought.
Remember, the silence you see in some of these systems, it's not consent, it's managed fear. The anger doesn't just vanish.
It gets transferred, it gets internalized, and it gets fragmented.
So we'll leave you with this final thought to chew on. When the total cost of all that internalization, the economic pain, the constant self-blame, the social isolation, when that finally becomes greater than the perceived risk of speaking out,
who will be the first to break that managed silence?
A huge thank you to all our Sip and Talkers for tuning in. If you enjoyed our discussion today, please be sure to subscribe to the Sip and Talk podcast.
And go check out our good friend Mickey's YouTube channel, Mickytolife. He's got some really fun memes and amazing travel vlogs.
We will catch you next time.
Catch you next time.